So what I've got a picture here is basically, two different skeletons. The one on the left is someone with a well-pronounced jaw, nice horseshoe shaped. And then number two is someone with basically a thinner face, someone that's going to have like a high arched palate. And one of the biggest things I want to talk about today is airway, because that's one of the most important things when it comes to sleep. So if you look at the two pictures, 1,000 years ago, all of our ancestors had wide arches. And basically when you look at like the arch, okay, as my arch gets wider, what happens is my nasal cavity gets bigger. And so why that's so important is, about 200 years ago, Industrial Revolution, we started making foods that were a lot softer. We didn't have to chew like we did. The quality of our food went down as a result. So we stopped strengthening our tongues and jaw muscles like we once did from having to chew significantly in our day. What that did was it weakened our tongue. And our tongue, as we're developing as children, isn't doing what it once did as far as ensuring that I'm pushing on the roof of the mouth and making sure that the lower jaw doesn't fall down, that I keep pushing up into that jaw so that my face grows up and out, which is going to leave me with a wide arch so that my tongue can fit in it by the time I'm an adult. So this is kind of what led me into all this stuff with my own situation is, I wasn't breastfed as a kid. I had food allergies related to formula. And then as a result, I had swollen tonsils, adenoids as a young kid. And I became a mouth breather at a young age, and I never switched back. So by the time I learned all this stuff at 40, I realized that I had the upper jaw of a 4-year-old, which means I had the nose of a 4-year-old. So no shit, my tongue didn't fit in my mouth. It's one of those things though that if my tongue can't fit in the mouth properly, I don't get a vacuum type effect to where I can breathe really well through my nose. And if I've got a small jaw and I've got a small nose, it makes it really hard for me to nose breathe when everything gets relaxed when I get into deeper levels of sleep. So what ends up happening oftentimes for a lot of people with sleep issues is everything relaxes as they get into deep sleep. And then as a result, they have a hard time breathing. And this is where people will either stop breathing completely or partially stop breathing. And then sensors go off and the body basically gets kicked out of a deep level of sleep and goes to a lower level of sleep. So if that's happening all night long, we end up waking up. Yeah, we spend 8 hours in bed, but the quality of our sleep sucks because it's kind of like every time you get into deep, restful sleep, it's like someone's waking you up. And they're like, hey, go back to lower level of sleep. And then when you get back here again, I'm going to wake you up. It's kind of like torture. So obviously, this is something where progression tends to happen when it comes to sleep apnea. And a lot of it comes back to our ability to breathe and a full-size airway, which most people nowadays do not have. It's just a matter of how bad is it on a spectrum. So kind of talking about what I had said, if you look at, for instance, back in the day, we would keep the tongue to the roof of the mouth here. And then what that would do is force the jaw as we grow forward and hold it up. So when the tongue sits on the roof of the mouth, it basically locks the lower jaw up with the upper jaw. And then it makes sure it provides scaffolding so the airway grows out this way. This is why all of our ancestors had big bone structure, big noses. They had well-pronounced cheek jawlines. Whereas nowadays, our airways are getting smaller and smaller to our tongue not pushing our jaw forward and up as we develop. That makes it harder and harder. So let's just say, for instance, I've got decent development, but then maybe I have a milk allergy. So now my tonsils and adenoids are swollen when I'm 7 every time I have milk, and I don't really tell my parents about it. And then all of a sudden I start mouth breathing. So it's something where it's like switching software from like optimal software being like, I'm going to nose breathe all the time, except for when I'm eating. I want my mouth closed. And the non-optimal is I start mouth breathing because, let's just say, my allergies are bad, or my tonsils or my adenoids get swollen, and it's hard for me to breathe through my nose because my nose is already smaller than it was 1,000 years ago. And then, before you know it, someone goes from nose breathing to mouth breathing, and they go back and forth until it just gets easier for someone to like just stay a mouth breather. And then the minute we're mouth breathing all day long, we're not really pushing our jaw forward and up. So as a result, we're left as adults with these airways that are the size of a child's. And this is where we're left doing jaw surgery, braces, expanders, or using a CPAP. And I think people don't understand why. And it's crazy because there were guys 100 years ago that were expanding kids at 5, 6 years old to make sure that there was just enough space for their tongue to fit and to ensure that their basically nose was going to be adequate size by the time they were adult, to ensure these kids weren't having sleep issues. So it's something that's been around for a very long time. I think after World War II, something where the money side of dentistry and how things were looked at changed. And, we're now left with society where basically maybe 20% of people have some kind of sleep disorder breathing, and it's only getting worse because our jaws and airways are getting smaller. And this is going to continue to happen due to not having to chew all the time. And this is where kind of different tools and devices can be used to basically go back and recapture what we've lost to ensure that, after we get out of our 30s, that we can still live a healthy life and have a good airway versus, I've got to sleep with a CPAP for the rest of my life. And even if I'm using a CPAP 8 hours a day, what about the other 16 hours a day that I don't get enough air to my body? And it's affecting my health big time by the time I'm 50. And then couple that with stress, and this is kind of what's happened to our society. So really important just to kind of understand the mechanics of the airway and jaw, and kind of, I think, why there are so many issues nowadays with people sleeping.